heck do you know about your customer? So without any further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Carla. And again, thanks for coming. Please help yourself to lunch and beverages, and I will be available afterwards if you have questions, and certainly Carla is at your disposal.
Thank you, Mitch. And thank you to the FH&H Law Firm. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to get together. As I've talked to you a little bit earlier, some of you were talking about the challenges you're having with getting to know your clients and figuring out what the heck they want. Well, guess what? It's a problem we all have. That's universal. And often it's really about discovering what your customers really want by uncovering their needs, their wants. And sometimes in this complicated world, it can get a little bit more challenging than we would all like, but there are ways to address that. And so what I want to do is take you through how I have been able to do it and how I help my clients do that. And so I want to share with you a little bit about two examples because of the great organizations I've worked with. They've often challenged me in terms of the questions I've had to go back and ask. And sometimes the questions can look like this. When I wind up working with you or with an organization, I will ask you questions that seem a little bit out of the ordinary. So I'll ask you, what kind of firm are you? Are you a day-to-day firm, or are you a futuristic firm? And also I'll ask you, what type of company, do you want to be? Because it isn't just as important to talk about where you are today, it's where you want to be and how can we help you. And the third question is really also, where's your senior management team, your executive team on this? Are they in alignment with you? Because in order to make that journey to really understanding your customer, these are just some of the questions you'll find that I'll ask if we wind up sitting down in your office and talking about you and your company. And so, with some of the great organizations I've worked with and the great clients I've worked with, I'm going to share a couple case studies of what that whole process was like to actually answer the question, what the heck do you know about your client? So one of the companies I've worked for is IBM. And I worked with the IBM sales team on a challenge they had, which was they were dealing with growth that was flat. And they wanted to actually reignite that growth. And so it was really a series of interviews with the sales reps, with the sales managers, but also the discussions with the customers to understand what was going on. And what we found was customers had changed. Customers didn't want a transactional relationship. They actually wanted a long-term relationship with IBM. That set of insights upended our strategy. That meant we had to create a new strategy. We had to identify new resources, and we also had to identify new tools that we needed to leverage. The result is we grew the pipeline by 339%. So when I say pipeline, I really mean the opportunities they have available to start working on. And then we grew the revenue by 171%. Satisfied customer. Second opportunity was to work with United Way of Alexandria. Their challenge was they weren't meeting their fundraising target. And they weren't sure why. And so as a board member, I started interviewing other board members, and what I realized is, hey, wait a minute, we have a wonderful, rich history of local involvement with the community. But very few members knew that that relationship we had with the community spanned almost 50 years. So we had done a lot, but we weren't really telling our story. So we wound up building out our story. And because of that, when we came down to meeting our fundraising goal, we were able to meet that. Now, telling your story was really more of an external process discussion of how do we get there. But here are some other benefits that were really surprising that we didn't expect. Because we had that presentation, now we could use it to go recruit new board members. And we had a much cleaner story to tell. That also made us recognize that we weren't giving the new members the type of experience they might have wanted when they joined our board. So it gave us a chance to revamp and create an onboarding experience that made the board members more effective, more knowledgeable, and they could bring their skills and talents to help us grow. But here's the icing on the cake for us by telling that story, is that the United Way National Division leveraged our story to create the branding that you see now, which is Live United. So what we find when we start asking questions about the customer is sometimes we're also giving ourselves an opportunity to solve some of our internal challenges. And some of the challenges we don't even know we have until we start figuring it out. So one of the other things that I will say with these two organizations, one that they both had in common is they had a lot of data. How often have you just looked through the data and tried to make sense of it and said, I don't know enough about my customer? By show of hands. How has that felt? A little challenging, a little frustrating. And oftentimes what we don't realize is what we're really looking for is insights. And so I've been in that situation, and it's also been equally challenging. And what I've done is, from that experience, built a system that allows to help us to help folks figure out how to identify the opportunities, how to drive revenue, and the building blocks of that includes design thinking. So I want to share a little bit about that with you. And what is design thinking? It's basically a human-centered approach from a designer process to help you solve complex problems. And when we do that, we really start with a plan. And in this case, it's really a question that we pose as a hypothesis. And then we go out and we talk to customers that are challenged with that problem that we're looking at. And then we get the data and we come back and we reframe the question because we now are starting to develop insights. And from those insights, we're able to come up with ideas on how to solve the problem that we reframed. We're able to prototype it, and then we're able to test it. And the beauty of this is we can go from test back into prototype and refine the problem, refine the prototype. And in some cases, we can even jump back to reframing if we find out of that series of testing and prototyping that really there's a deeper question that we need to answer. So it's very flexible. But the other really wonderful benefit of it is that the solutions you come out with to address the customer's problem are really that are desirable, they're feasible, and they're viable. So you mitigate your risk when you go out and put a solution together for a customer, and you're able to deliver something that they really want. So when you're challenged, how many of you also are challenged with looking at the competition and saying, how do I differentiate myself? Yeah, you got a lot of people out there that sell the same thing you're selling, may change a couple of words. But the reality is when you start looking at your revenue and your profitability, you can see the results. And one of the advantages of leveraging design thinking is you can start to differentiate yourself from the competition. So I want to share with you a case study from one of my clients. And I'll say up front that this is an extreme example. And I will also say that design thinking can be used in extreme and non-extreme examples, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Dan Smolin, who owns the Green Suits, which is a small and medium business recruiting company, came to me because he was having a challenge with driving revenue. And in his case, he said, look, I'm doing LinkedIn and Indeed are just disrupting my business. And in this case, he's also experiencing a challenge with the fact that the social media and the blogging were no longer effective. And he's like, I need to find another way to reach my customer. And through a series of interviews and conversations, realized that he had done radio in a past life. And the thought was, let's explore podcasting as an extension, as another way to reach out to people. And so we did that. We posed the question and built a plan that said, okay, why do people listen to podcasting? Because how often have you gone out looking for information on a question you have about your customer and you cannot find it? How many of you experienced that? Because I know I have. That was our situation here. We could not find the answer. So we built a plan, went out and asked that question, and we interviewed listeners. And when we finished with the interviews and looked at the data, the insight we came away with is the question we really needed to ask is, what is the type of podcasting experience you want? That's different than why do you listen? And what they said they wanted ranged from, and I leverage the website, and that really needs to be, that's really important to me. How I make decisions about your podcast. You've got to be in that decision loop. If you're not, I won't even see you. So what we settled on was focusing on the website that we wound up coming up from the ideation and then did a prototype. And we went back out and tested it. What it did for us is it helped us realize that the website was not one that we could do all in one experience. We had to actually chunk it up. And we had to actually break it up into two phases, because one of the components that a customer had proposed to us during the prototyping that we then put in there, the feedback was, you're not ready to do that. The way you're proposing how we go to market with that, or you go to market with that, would not be appealing to us. So we wound up chunking that into phase 2, and then we're in the process of building out phase 1 in a way that's actually more meaningful for the customer and the end user. Now, because of this, Dan Smolin felt like he had addressed the risk. And so what he did was, in 2018, he shut down the green suits. And now has become a full-time podcaster. So what we are also doing, we were able to address, is it viable, feasible, desirable? But we are also rebranding from the Green Suits Radio, which was the original name of the podcast, to the Tightrope with Dan Smolin. Because what the research also told us is that if we stick with appealing to corporations with a podcast, we're going to miss out on a larger audience that really has a greater need around the redefinition of work. So that meant we changed the target audience to employees and entrepreneurs who have a mission about the redefinition of work, in terms of that's why they go in and become entrepreneurs. Or if you're an employee, how do you want to define how your work looks like? Much different, much more meaningful, and impactful for the audience that Dan Smolin is targeting. So again, this is an extreme example. And what I want to share with you now is why, even though this looks extreme, why don't enough of us do this? Because sometimes we hang on to a piece of business that really, if we look at it, is no longer who we are. And a lot of it, I would say, is a factor of fear. Not having enough information, not knowing what steps to take, not knowing who we can leverage, and wondering, is the customer going to want this, right? Well, a lot of times it's also about wearing your own brand badge. And what do I mean by that? When we're wearing our own brand badge, we're worried about, can I get the customer to this event? How can I get them to buy more of my stuff? Those are all important things that we have to do to run a business. There's nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, we need to find a way to actually think long term. What's next that the customer wants? And in this day and age, what we're finding is customers now want companies to wear the customer badge. And what that means is they want you to deliver on the experiences they want, and they want you to understand what they want. I shouldn't have to tell you what I want. You should know. Now, that sounds kind of like, well, hey, wait a minute. I'm not a mind reader. True. None of us are mind readers. But leveraging the design thinking process, we can get into their minds and understand what they're thinking so that we can deliver the types of products that they want. And one of the reasons that they're also pushing us as companies, as organizations, is because, yes, they don't want to have to figure out, or for you to figure out, they want you to figure out what they want, but they want a relationship with you. And the relationship today in our digital space is now by the phone. Everybody's got an iPhone or a Samsung phone or some type of smartphone. And sometimes that's where the relationship starts, and how we get there to be part of that conversation is increasingly important. Yes, we all want the face-to-face, but how many of us have customers we've never met face-to-face and it's always been by phone or by Skype or something? Having that relationship and figuring out how to wear that customer brand badge is going to be critical. So I want to take you through another case study of a customer, not as extreme as the one we talked about before, but represents more of the environment we all are often in, which is we kind of have to build it as we go while we still maintain the business that we have, right? And so High Road Strategies is a public policy consulting firm. And they came to us because, as Joel, the principal, says, the referrals weren't working, the references weren't working, and I haven't made money in 2 years. Now, mind you, this is challenging. And he said, I want to do this digital thing. And I said, what do you mean digital thing? He said, I want to go digital. I said, okay, Joel, I'm not sure if that's the right answer, but let's sit down and talk and figure out if that is the right answer. And I'll share with you what we found in those discussions. Joel and High Road Strategies, as a public policy firm, are focused on 3 areas. It's energy, it's manufacturing, and it's workforce. Those are interesting areas. And what we found through conversation is that he has a unique set of skills that can cut across all of these industries. His challenge was he didn't have the time or space to actually sit down and figure out that he could take the frameworks that he has for energy and apply it to workforce and manufacturing. And he didn't have the time to figure out that he could apply the workforce framework to energy and manufacturing, and the same with manufacturing to energy and workforce. How many of you have been in that situation where you kind of suspect you could go into another market, but you're just not quite sure how to get there? That's how he felt. So what we did is we did wind up doing the digital thing. And we did it as a newsletter. And the reason we did it this way is because we needed to tell a story that allowed his thought leadership to flow, but also highlighted to his audience and prospects how his unique set of skills could benefit them and their industries in ways that they had never imagined. He wound up creating a framework that looks at the workforce in manufacturing that he wound up taking to the Century Foundation. That turned into a white paper. The white paper has now turned into a road show that started on Capitol Hill last year and continues through this year. He has also contributed chapters to an industrial policy book on manufacturing and the workforce. And oh, by the way, he's deepening his relationship with the Century Foundation because they're finding other projects to work on. And yes, Joel is making money. But the point here, when we ask what the heck do we know about our customers and our clients, it's really about every great idea starts with asking the right questions. We're in an increasingly complex environment where the old ways of doing things aren't really working anymore. And we're grappling with how do we get new insights, new answers, new ideas that create new opportunities, that create new revenue opportunities for us. So in a way, we're going to have to think differently because also the customer has told us that we want a relationship, not a transaction. And considering the fact that we are in this fourth industrial revolution where we all focus on what technology's out there, what new thing, whether it's AI or Internet of Things that we can leverage, at the end of the day, it's human-centered. It comes back to the client. It comes back to understanding how they're thinking, how they're feeling, because that's where we're going to get the engagement. So with that said, are you ready to pivot? Because if you are, we can talk about a pivot assessment to help you do a checklist and take a look at your company and grade yourself on where you are and where you want to be. So with that said, I can do coffee and meet you and we can do the pivot assessment and start that journey. But I want to thank you and the FH&H firm for this opportunity to talk, and now I'll open the floor to questions. So are there questions? Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
You need to understand what are the customers trying to help. And we're in this major transition, moving to digital world. And the one who gets there first gets all the models.
Oh, yeah.
They get the signal first.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just think your strategy sounds excellent, but I don't think it should be a question of whether, if, or when we're going digital.
Yeah.
That's got to be a conversation that should let.
So just so for folks that are on Facebook and didn't hear the question or the comment was, we're in an environment where we are already going digital. That transition has happened, and the challenge is you need to get the signals. If you're not hearing the signals, you're going to miss an opportunity. And really, if you miss the opportunity, it could be a lost cause altogether, because he or she who gets there first gets all the marbles. That was the comment. I agree. Yeah.
I think especially given the fact that most of the people who have been in business for some time are not as familiar with the major portion of their market, which is a younger group.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't quite speak the language in the same way that the younger people do.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, it is that younger people's language that most resonates with them.
Right.
And so the transition is more difficult to make. And I think your ideas of assessing the customer and having conversations with them and asking the right kind of questions and listening very carefully to the unexpected responses that you may get. That's the only way to get to the digital age in an efficacious way.
Agreed. So just for the folks on Facebook, the comment here was that as we go through this generational shift, how do we start to understand the language they're using, the experiences they want, and what they want? And one of the ways to do it, and really this is one of the ways that I found, and I truly believe in, is really doing those interviews, because I will tell you, you will find some very interesting behaviors and ways that people try to solve their own problems that perhaps there's another way to solve it. And in this digital age, we have got to be more open to trying new things and really getting in front of our customers and not just behind a screen. Other questions? Yes.
So if your market is business to business,
Mm-hmm.
and you have multiple people you have to interface with, who are all very, 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 very busy, you don't have time, and you know that you need to figure out how to, like, what's going on and how things are changing. What advice do you give about if somebody is reluctant to, or doesn't have time to participate in an interview? What are some other suggestions for how you can connect within a very large company with people like Grace?
Well, a great question. So the question was, if you're working in the B2B space, what advice would you have to connect with executives that are quite busy and don't have the time to do it? I would argue that when I asked the question at the beginning of the presentation, how long do you want to be in business for? I'm not kidding, because that's a question we need to start asking ourselves, especially as we continue to move through this digital age. And if an executive isn't asking that question, especially with the generational shift, there are going to be opportunities that are missed and revenue that is missed. So I would argue they should engage. Their executive senior leadership team should be engaged, because this is a strategic issue at the highest level. They can also task a team within their organization to go do this piece of work, but they still need to be engaged in understanding what these signals are saying, what they mean. And I find that one of the best ways, if an executive is really busy, maybe give him a couple of the interviews that you wind up taping and give him that and say, download these and listen to these on the way to work. If that doesn't jolt you with some of the insights that customers are willing to give you and are begging for you to hear, you're really missing an opportunity, because that may be the way you get your executive engaged if they are not engaged. Yeah. Oh, awesome question. Awesome question. So the question was, how do I come up with the questions that are asked? And this starts with a lot of the interviewing process. That is so critical, because it's understanding, where's your business today? What are you grappling with? What are you clear about? What are you not clear about? But we also wind up doing a lot of research, because we do leverage the data. The data gives off signals of where we can focus, and we'll sit down and prioritize with you. Here's what we're seeing. We look at marketplace trends and what's going on there too. And we really want you to we want you to understand what we're seeing, because we become that fresh set of eyes that walk into your business that can give you those insights, or may suggest, hey, you want to take a look at this, and we look at where your competition is. All those things become the foundation for how we start to figure out what the question is that we can't answer. So for the Dan Smolin one, I had looked through so much data on podcasting. I could see the trends that it was going and whatnot, but I could never get any data on why people listen. And when you start to think about why people listen, you can start to unpack, well, why do they listen? Where do they listen? You know, all the questions you want to get answered. But when we started doing those interviews, it blew our minds. So Dan's here, and he's okay with me sharing with you this. We found out that there were certain behaviors in terms of the way people listen to podcasts. Meaning some people might listen to 1 or 2 a month, and you better be clear, because they wanted to validate before they ever listened that this was worthwhile. That's why the website mattered, because that was one of the first places they would go to check you out. And then we found a different type of listener that was, I would call a power or extreme listener, where they're listening to 7, 8, 9 podcasts a week. So almost 40 a month. Their behaviors are way different. They're like, yeah, I don't, the website's important, yeah, but here's what I do. And they would literally walk you through the fact that if your search stuff isn't on point, out the window. If your description's not on point, out the window. And so what they also gave us was a process of how they both make decisions about what they listen to. That was so critical, because for what we did with Dan's website is we flipped the way we presented the content. So when we started, we leveraged the guest, then we talked about the topic, and then we put the host at the end. We had to move the host to the front because that was one of the first things they made decisions about was who's this host? What's the topic? What is their background? Are they credible? And once they understood the credibility, they then said, okay, I want to hear more about the topic. And then the guest at the end. But guess what? The guest had to be equally as credible as the host. Those were insights we were never going to find out reading a white paper. We literally had to ask the questions. And so based on that, we prototyped the website. One of the things they told us on the website is, why don't you have a community? Okay, so we built that in to the test in the prototype. We went back out and asked, okay, what do you think about how we are presenting community? They said, nope, start over. Not good enough. You're not ready. That's what the signal was. Building community is hard. So we decided, okay, wait a minute, let's just get the website piece that everybody is on point about, and we'll build community in phase 2. Gives us more runtime, gives them more runtime, because you only have one opportunity to make an impression. And with the attention spans of the people now on the website, you know, attention spans are about 8 seconds or less. So you really got to bring your A game. And we realized we weren't ready to bring that A game, so we made it phase 2.
It's a perfect example of why it's empowered to hire outside resources to handle this, because the executives in an organization can't possibly spare that level of time on a new possibility. They're working on what they've got to do now.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. So the comment here was, this is example of why executives need to hire outside resources to actually help do this piece of work, because it is intense. And that's why I also said before, it's also good if the executive buys off, have a team that you assign to do this. Because inside your companies, you know your company's best, but you're also the ones that are going to impact the change that's going to happen in your organizations. We can help guide you to get down that path. We can help share with you experiences we've seen with other clients. But at the end of the day, it's your company. We want you to be successful. We want you grabbing that next customer and delighting that next customer, because you now understand the experience that they want. And I will tell you that this design thinking concept is being actively used in government. It's being actively used in commercial and nonprofits. People seriously want to have a relationship with their clients. And the more complex the questions are getting, we need another tool and mechanism to do that. And what I'm seeing in the business to business space is the emotion piece. And this is one of the reasons I got into it, is because I could start to see where the business to consumer mindset, where we see emotion start to drive through, is starting to really start to show up in B2B. And I've spent most of my career in B2B. And so when you start to have decision makers, and we're talking about the younger generations moving into decision-making positions, emotion matters to them. It's the thing that motivates them. And so we as business leaders have to start tapping into that. And if we don't find a way to tap into it, we're going to be tapped out.
Okay, so I want to offer to the group assembled, why does this work? And it does work. It's great that Carla talked about the stuff that embarrassed me for 15 minutes talking about transformation. But I went to Carla because I knew what I knew and I didn't know what I didn't know. Before a career in recruiting and business, I was actually in broadcasting. And so the first podcast, I did what I knew. I wanted it to sound like radio. It was really slick. It had stop sets and commercials, and it was long. And it sounded fine to me, but I was looking at my response rates on Apple Podcasts and on the other channels that I had, and I found everything was starting to incrementally drop, and I didn't know why. And so we blew this thing up. We said, let's throw out all our assumptions about what we think is right. As a result, I am publishing shorter, more content-rich, more get to the point, more rapidly disseminated information. The podcast, which is still a work in progress, is reinforcing what you will get out of each episode. I may interview one guest, but I may break that into 3 segments, and it actually works better. It raises the level of the guess gravitas. It makes the topic information more resonant. And if you're in your car, maybe stuck on the beltway, it's 20 minutes. It's a 20-minute listen as opposed to an hour-long listen. The result, our listenership is way up. Our retention rate is way up. We are building an audience. This is why I hired Carla, and it worked.
Dan, if I may ask a question, how long did, and I realize this may vary from company to company depending upon their challenge, but how long did this transformation from beginning to take?
I started podcasting in the summer of 2016. It was an extension of my brand called Green Suits. It was called Green Suits Radio. The idea was to kind of highlight people who were in career paths that maybe would help bring client business to the Green Suits so that I had more recruiting work. Then came the 2016 election, and my relevance was blown away. I knew I was in trouble. For reasons I don't want to get into, we just felt like, let's try something else. Let's broaden our appeal. Let's talk about more sticky issues that people are really worried about that keep them up at night. But I still wasn't producing the right kind of podcast. So now we're into November 2016. I go to Carla. I said, I need help. So by, I would say, the beginning of 2017, we started our exploration. I engaged in a formal contract with Carla, and I said, I'm not going to tell you how to do this. I'll tell you what I want to have, but the rest is up to you. Guide me. And so by May and June of 2017, I think we had gone through both an individual process with Carla about how I perceive myself and how I perceive my audience. And then Carla went into her deep dive of interviewing people that listen to podcasts, and she created different archetypes of the kinds of listeners that probably would resonate with a podcast. A lot of work. And then she had to prepare it in a way that brought the insight out so I could say, oh, that's the kind of podcast I need to do. It was mind-blowing. It was liberating. It was liberating. That's the point I want to leave with everybody. When you're a sole proprietor LLC like I am, you know, it's like l'état c'est moi, you know, the world is me, you know, and it's hard to get other people to penetrate your bubble. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. And I was trying to run a business, and I was getting fragmented. And that's why I went to Carla and said, I trust you. I'm going to give you free reign to do this. Let's figure it out together. And I know whatever we create, because it's not entirely out of my head, is going to be really amazing. The other thing that we learned is that my sound quality wasn't great for reasons that had to do with kind of the technology I was buying to do this on the internet. I invested in broadcast quality technology. The sound is phenomenal. By the end of this year, I'm going to have a scaled podcast, hopefully with a lot of listeners, and that's earning money.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I want to turn to, yes?
I want to add on to what Dan just said.
Yes.
He doesn't know this, but I'm one of the people that was interviewed. Because I've never participated in a podcast. And Carla was trying to get multiple points of view about how someone would perceive all the different things that were going on. So I happen to have inside knowledge about Carla's very defined process. And what Dan has described is an evolution which definitely takes place once you go on this journey. But Carla has a very specific set of steps she takes you through. And even after the first step, I think one of the things that Dan shared is he already had major ahas very early on. And so even with a very defined first step that leads to the next set of steps, you will already start having ahas about what you need to do to transform the company.
So the comment of Karen was that as you go through this process with design thinking, you get ahas pretty fast. And that's one of the things I love about it, because then you can start to change what you do quickly and test, prototype it, see if it works. If it works, great, let's go for it. If it doesn't, okay, what else can we try? That creates a culture of continuous learning in your organization. And our customers, if they're saying to us, we want a long-term relationship, they're expecting us to continue to learn as we continue to build that relationship with them. And if we're not taking advantage of that, that's a missed opportunity and that's missed revenue. So, other questions? All right. Well, I want to thank again FH&H Law Firm and everyone here for coming. This has been a great opportunity to spend some time with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
I